Now we see that our Nessus loaded up, so we can go ahead and full screen this real quick. Now we can go ahead and run a new scan or set up a new scan, and we'll just do a basic network scan. So we'll go ahead and select that. Now, before we set our target, we'll need to discover our target IP. So we can go ahead and open up a terminal. Since we don't have the credentials to log into this Windows 7 VM, we do know that our current IP by running ifconfig. And by running ifconfig, we see our current IP under the ETH0 or Ethernet 0 adapter is going to be 10.02.15. Now we can run net discover, and then the -R option will specify the network range. So we'll just type in our Kali IP and then a /24 for the subnet 24. And then we'll see if it'll listen for any IPs that stand out. So these first three IPs are just VirtualBox network adapters. We don't really need to worry about those, but we do see a 2.17. So we'll go ahead and take this IP and we'll input it into our target field. We'll just name this Windows 7. And that's just for the generic schedule. If we wanted to set a schedule scan for our host or the target VM, we could set up the schedule. And then notifications, discovery, what kind of scan. We'll do scan all ports. The assessment, what kind of assessment type, scan for known web vulnerabilities, quick, complex, or custom. We'll just leave it as default. And then the report, we can leave all this default. Advanced, what kind of scan type, scan low bandwidth, in case you need to prioritize your network bandwidth. That way you don't consume too much, you could do that. But since it's just going to be our virtual network, we'll just leave it as default. And then credentials, if we wanted to set up a credentialed or authenticated scan, we could set up the credentials here, but we don't know the credentials. And then all the default plugins that it's going to use to scan our targets that we specify. So we can go ahead and hit save. Now we see our Windows 7 scan was created. Let's go ahead and click this launch button over here. So go ahead and click that to launch the scan. This may take a while to run, so it kind of just depends on your network speed. So while that's running, go ahead and maximize that so you can see. And now that we see it running, we see this little spinning icon over here showing that it's running. We go ahead and click on the scan, and then it'll populate the host and the different findings that it may find. So 10.02.17, vulnerabilities 19 informational findings so far. You see it's a basic network scan for the policy. Status still running. Severity based is going to use the CVSS v3 to score the vulnerabilities. And then scanner, local scanner, that's this Nessus Essentials over here, and then the start date. Now we see it's populating the vulnerabilities in a pie chart based on what it finds. So 83% right now is going to be informational. We did find a medium finding over here, so one medium finding. Over here on this tab, we can look at the vulnerabilities more in depth. So we see SMB signing not required. That's a vulnerability in itself. SMB, multiple issues, and then et cetera, et cetera. And now on history tab, we can see the history of the scans that we've launched. So we'll go ahead and let that do its thing, and then we'll revisit once it finishes. Now that our scan is finished, we see quite a few results here. So we see a mixed number of vulnerabilities that are grouped together. To fix that, we can go to this settings icon over here and then disable groups, so that way it disables the grouping. Now over here, we see two criticals, MS11-030, vulnerability in DNS resolution, could allow for remote execution or remote code execution. That is a pretty critical vulnerability. And then we see unsupported Windows OS. Windows 7 Professional is no longer supported, so that is a valid, true positive vulnerability. Then MS17010, this is going to be the vulnerability, aka also known as Eternal Blue. So we'll be able to actually put this exploit into use and have a practical example of getting remote code execution on the Windows 7 machine. Then MS16-047, another SAM and LSAD. Then SMB signing, and then everything else. Over here, Nessus scan information, that'll be details about the scan that we kicked off, OS identification. So it's saying it's a Windows 7 Professional, confidence level 99, and then how it was able to detect that it was a Windows 7 VM. So let's say you're starting on an engagement, you would utilize Nessus or any other vulnerability scanner to scan the network that you have authorization to test on. Usually you'll get a network range or maybe a subnet or some URLs. You can perform the network scan or a web app scan using Nessus and then start from there, see if we can identify something like this, like some of these unsupported OSs. Maybe it picks up on the services as well. You never know. So it's good practice to do a vulnerability scan while you're pen testing as well. And that'll be it for this video.